Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker. We do begin with the latest breaking news out of Colorado Springs following this weekend's mass shooting at a prominent LGBTQ nightclub that killed 5 and injured dozens more. We expect an update from authorities next hour. It comes as earlier today, the suspect, Anderson Lee Aldridge, was charged with 5 counts of murder and 5 hate crime-related counts as well. Now, I just spoke with the area's district attorney just a few moments ago, who told us that these charges are essentially preliminary and were filed by police, which means they could be amended or added to. We're going to show you that entire interview in just a moment. But first, investigators have not yet definitively said what they believe the motive for the shooting was. But here's what he heard from the Colorado Springs mayor this morning.
The motive is still under investigation. It has all the trappings of a hate crime, but we need to look at social media. We need to look at all kinds of other information that we're gathering from people that knew the individual before we make any definitive conclusions about a motivation. But it certainly, as I say, has the trappings of a hate crime.
Now, investigators say the gunman opened fire with an AR-15 style rifle late Saturday night inside Club Q. Remarkably, they say 2 patrons at the club were able to heroically subdue the suspect until help arrived. Colorado Governor Jared Polis has ordered all flags at public buildings in the state to be lowered for 5 days in memory of the 5 lives lost. But all of this comes amid what LGBTQ rights groups warn is a rise in hate crimes in recent weeks and months, including an incident just this past weekend in New York's Hell's Kitchen, in which someone threw a brick at the front window of a gay bar. Here's what GLAAD's president and CEO had to say this morning. Listen.
We don't feel safe as a community, and we don't have any reason to feel safe as a community. We're under attack, and the rhetoric is driving it. Whether or not, whatever the motive comes out on this, we know that we've seen an uptick in violence against our community. We feel it, and we don't feel safe when we're out and about.
Joining me now from the ground in Colorado Springs is Maura Barrett, and also with us is NBC News senior reporter Ben Collins. Thanks so much to both of you for starting us off on this horrific breaking news. Maura, I want to start with you. Talk about the mood and the feeling on the ground there as people begin to cope with the shock and horror that has just befallen their community.
Well, Kristen, understandably, there's a lot of raw emotion still circulating here in Colorado Springs. I want to note that this weekend marked the 20th anniversary of Club Q here in the community. The party that was happening that night was a celebration wrapping up that anniversary for a place that very much is a safe space in this community. Colorado is seen as a blue state these days, right? But this is a more conservative pocket of the area, more rural. And this is something, the club was something that people felt safe going to express who they are, love who they love, and not face any ramifications for it. And that, they now say, is shattered. And so among that sadness, there also exists anger because of that uptick in violence. We've seen those upticks in threats. And the club owners even put out a statement, as well as I've been speaking with people in the community. They want to see action taken against those who have spread a lot of this anti-LGBTQ plus rhetoric, because they do believe that there has been a tie. Obviously, we're still waiting for more details from police on whether or not this can be specifically called a hate crime. But that is how a lot of members in the community are feeling right now, Kristen.
Maura, you paint the picture so well and so clearly of the pain that community is dealing with right now. What are you learning about the suspect? And we expect to learn a little bit more. I should say there's going to be a press conference in the next hour.
A lot of unanswered questions, unfortunately, still, Kristen. We're still trying to understand exactly what the motive might have been for this 22-year-old suspected gunman, how he made his plans to do this, if it was planned at all, if he was known to anybody in the club. The club owner said that they did not necessarily recognize him, but obviously we know that that might mean something different. We don't know how he acquired the weapons, the long rifle and the handgun that he had on his person when he came in. A security guard told our affiliate that he saw the suspected gunman approach wearing tactical gear and just opened fired without any direction, it seemed, once he came in. And so there's a lot of things we're looking to understand, whether or not a potential tie to a felony in the last year around a suspected bomb threat might have should have triggered any red flag laws that exist here in Colorado. Police were also expecting to hear a full update on the names and details about the rest of the victims, the 5 that unfortunately had passed away. We do know that about 19 people are still recovering from their injuries in the hospital, Kristen.
And Maura, I think what you say really encapsulates it, the fact that people go to Club Q to feel safe. It's a place where they feel like they can love who they want to love, and now that has been shattered there. Maura, thank you for that. Ben, let me turn to you. What are you seeing online in the wake of this shooting? Is anything standing out to you? Is anything providing any new insight into why this may have happened?
Sure. So I will say that the months-long campaign of targeting trans and gay rights events and supporters and things like drag brunches, that has been a persistent narrative by the anti-LGBTQ right in the last 6 months to the last year. One of the main drivers of that hate is an account called Libs of TikTok. And hours after this attack, they pointed to another separate drag brunch in Colorado. I don't even know what the motivation was there, but I don't know how else to put this. The celebration of violence in these spaces in the last day, it's been particularly jarring. Places like 4chan and generally anti-gay, anti-trans spaces online, if they're not explicitly condoning or rooting for this violence, they are saying that, that these places shouldn't exist to begin with. Therefore, the violence can stop if these people stop behaving this way or looking like this or loving who they want to love. That's where we're at now. These narratives have taken such hold that they are, in fact, endorsing violence at this point.
It's horrifying to hear that. I think you said this, but I think we can't emphasize it enough. This was during a drag night and the day before Transgender Day of Remembrance. How significant are those 2 dates?
Yeah, and also hours before what they called an all-ages drag brunch, which is probably the #1 target of these anti-LGBTQ events recently. Like, for example, the Proud Boys will go and protest any drag brunch, any drag story hour, anything that a child might go to meet a drag queen, not, just to show them that they're human beings and people. They go there and they read Dr. Seuss there. They read regular books, but it's read by a drag queen, and they have breakfast. It is not some hypersexual event, but that's what it's viewed as on the far right. And these spaces have become dangerous places of real-life information warfare. There's Proud Boys showing up on one side. Sometimes people, like local Antifa members, show up on the other side as a way to... It becomes a place where kids aren't safe, not because of the event itself, but because of this culture war that's been propped up on top of it. And that's not something that should happen. This is not something, these people should be able to live their lives without fear of being murdered, literally. But right now, that's the sort of climate that's been created by anti-LGBTQ protesters and, frankly, bigots.
Ben Collins, we always appreciate your perspective in these moments, even though it is so difficult to hear all of that. Thank you so much for your great reporting. And as we mentioned, we are expecting another press conference from authorities in Colorado Springs in the next hour, including the area's district attorney, Michael Allen. I spoke with him just moments ago about the state of their investigation. Thank you so much for joining us, and my condolences to you and your community.
Thank you so much for those kind words. It's been tough on this community. This incident does not reflect Colorado Springs or El Paso County, Colorado, I can tell you that.
Well, I know that you are working hard on this investigation. So if you would, take us through the charges that were filed earlier today. 5 counts of murder, 5 counts of a bias-motivated crime. What do they reveal about the shooter's motivation? What should people take from these charges?
Yeah, so actually, I need to clear up some information on that. The charges that are in the media at this moment are the arrest charges. Those are the charges that the police department in their investigation determined that the person would be arrested on. The formal charges have not been filed yet. We will make the formal filing decision in the coming days. When we do, it will probably include a lot of those same charges that you just mentioned. but it could include even more than just those. So the evaluation on final charges is not done yet.
Okay, that's a really important distinction. Is there any way you can give us an indication of what the additional charges may include?
So oftentimes, and I'm speaking in general sense here, but oftentimes in a murder case, you might have different types of murder that you charge. So in Colorado, we have first-degree murder, which is after deliberation and with intent. That's our highest level murder charge. It's a Class 1 felony. But we oftentimes will charge extreme indifference murder if the evidence supports it. That's a different theory of first-degree murder. It also is a Class 1 felony, which gives you life in prison without parole. So we could charge those two different types of theories of murder. We could charge bias-motivated crimes, which is what most people think about as hate crimes. We have to have evidence to support that. Obviously, we have some evidence based on the location of this shooting and the people that were killed and shot at. So we've got some evidence, but we need to make sure that there's enough there to support the bias-motivated crimes as well. There could be attempted murder charges as well. For anybody that was inside that club that were not shot, that would probably qualify as attempted murder, and we're trying to determine how many counts of attempted murder we might need to file. And that'll be based on, do we know everybody that was inside that club that escaped without injury?
And let me follow up with you on some of what you're saying. Have you been able to nail down a specific motive at this point in time?
You know, the funny thing is that as people, we do want to know motive. In criminal cases, though, we don't have to prove a motive. So we don't always, in criminal investigations, look for why somebody acted the way they did. We just have to have evidence that shows that they acted, you know, with Class 1 felony murder. Did they act with deliberation and intent? To answer the question about motive, we do look for that, though, in addition, because we are all people and we want to know that. And we suspect that we will be presenting this to a jury at some point in the distant future.
But you're not able to say right now what that motive is. Okay, understood. Yeah. Let's talk about the issue of a hate crime, or to be specific, a bias-motivated crime. Yes. It appears as though you're saying you have a lot of evidence to suggest that's the case. Can you say definitively at this point that this was a hate crime, a bias-motivated crime?
It is trending in that direction is the best that I can say at this point. We need to make sure that we look at the totality of the evidence as we know it when it comes to that filing decision. If the evidence supports bias-motivated crime, we will file those charges as well. I want to be clear about it, though, because there's misconception about this as well. The top-level charges are going to be the murder charges. They're the ones that will give us the biggest option for sentencing. The bias-motivated crimes, the highest we can go is a Class 4 felony, which is much less than that top-level charge of murder. So these are just add-on charges. But if the evidence supports it, I think it's going to be important to include those charges as well, even if it doesn't affect the outcome on sentencing.
Okay, I want to ask you about the suspect and what we're learning about him. The Colorado Springs police chief said that the suspect was not speaking to investigators. Is that still the case? And how does that complicate your ability to investigate this?
So actually, that's an area that I'm not going to comment on. Okay. You know, as Americans, we all have a constitutional right to remain silent if we decide to, and we can't then use that silence against the person. So I'm going to ensure that this person has those rights protected by the Constitution. We'll have a fair trial process, and a lot of that stuff will come out at the appropriate time. But we have to be careful that we're not trying this case in the media as well. So I'm going to refrain from commenting on that.
Understood. Can you tell us, is the suspect's family being cooperative with your investigation?
That's another thing that I think is too close to the heart of the investigation. Again, we want to protect that investigation and subsequent prosecution effort. So unfortunately, I would prefer to not give that information at this point.
We understand that someone who matches the shooter's name and age was the source of a bomb threat in 2021, and we just want to be very specific. Can you confirm that that's the same person?
So unfortunately, I'm going to give you an answer that's not going to be very satisfying, but I'm going to give it with some clarifying information to help you understand why I'm giving the answer that I'm giving. Colorado has a very restrictive sealing statute, meaning that if somebody is charged in a crime and that case is subsequently dismissed for whatever reason, whether the prosecution dismisses it or the court decides they need to dismiss it, that case is automatically sealed. The sealing statute specifically says that our response to questions on that hypothetical scenario I just gave you is that no record exists. I cannot talk to you about that other than I've seen the media reports about a press release that the sheriff's office gave out last year about the incident that you're talking about. And that's as far as I can go at this particular point.
Can you tell us, did the suspect obtain the weapon legally?
That's something we're definitely looking into. We want to make sure that if there are weapons charges, that we include those in the charging as well. I can't tell you specifically right now whether they were obtained legally or illegally, but I can tell you certainly that we're looking into that. And if there are violations of the law there, we'll certainly charge that as well.
And it was an AR-15?
My understanding, it was a long gun. Specifically as to whether it was an AR-15, I don't know that I want to share that specific right now.
Okay, I want to ask you about the victims and also these two individuals who heroically subdued the suspect. First, what do you want people to know about those who lost their lives?
Well, you know, the thing that I want people to understand is that these were people's brothers and sisters and sons and daughters. They had people that loved them. And everybody in our community across this great nation deserves to be able to go out at night and enjoy themselves at the club of their choosing. And that's certainly true of the LGBTQ community. They've been harassed and maligned and intimidated for far too long, and that has got to stop. This antagonistic communications that is directed towards that population is unhealthy for our community, and it's certainly unfair to that community as well. And I stand in solidarity with them as we face these types of issues. I can tell you that those two people that you mentioned that were brave and stood up to the shooter in this case, their heroism is unmatched. It's quite simply something that I've never seen in a case, and I've been prosecuting for a long time. What they did was really remarkable, especially in the face of danger that they were facing at that time.
Well, I thank you so much for joining us today. And I know this is such a difficult, tragic day for your entire community. So again, our condolences to you. Our thoughts are with you, and we appreciate the information. Colorado District Attorney Michael Allen, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
And coming up, we will have much more on the tragic events out of Colorado Springs, what it means for the local community and the nation's LGBTQ community. We're going to speak with Colorado's first openly gay Black woman elected to its House of Representatives. She's also a Colorado Springs native. That is next. Plus, meet the new House member who's been fighting to end gun violence for more than 10 years, and he's only 25. My interview with Florida's newly elected Congressman Maxwell Frost. That's also ahead, and you don't want to miss it. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Stay with us. Welcome back. The country and the community in Colorado Springs continue to mourn the shooting at an LGBTQ nightclub on the eve of Transgender Day of Remembrance. Now, according to the Human Rights Campaign, 32 transgender and gender nonconforming people were killed in 2022 alone. And 344 anti-LGBTQ bills were introduced in state legislators all across the country, 25 of which passed. Joining me now is Colorado State Representative Leslie Herod, the first openly gay Black woman to be elected to the Colorado House of Representatives. Thank you for being with us on a really tragic day and moment.
Thanks for having me.
I just want to get your reaction to what happened on Sunday when you heard the news.
Well, when I woke up on Sunday, I was heartbroken to hear the news that there was a mass shooting in my hometown in a bar, a club that I frequent when I'm home, Club Q, and that five people had been murdered and more had been wounded. My heart broke because I knew it was stemming from hate of people who are just like me, who are LGBTQ, who love who we love, who present the way that we present, and that we were targeted and murdered simply for being ourselves.
Talk to me a little bit about Club Q. As you just said, it's a place that you frequent. It's a place where you feel safe, feel at home. What does the attack mean?
It's a place where we can celebrate with each other. You know, when I go home to Colorado Springs, which is only an hour from Denver, often I go around this time of year for the holidays. And when I'm ready to seek a little bit of solace and to hang out and laugh with folks just like me, I go there. I go to Club Q. Club Q is a place where people can go to get away from discrimination, to get away from being judged for being who they are, and just be loved and just be in community and just have everyday normal conversations like anyone else does, but a place where we can feel safe. And that's been ripped away from many in Colorado Springs, and it breaks my heart.
The shooter was preliminarily charged with 5 counts of murder and 5 counts of committing a hate crime. Now, we were just told by the district attorney that there will likely be more charges. But talk a little bit about the charges and, more broadly speaking, how concerned you are about this increase in hate crimes and crimes against the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, well, it's clear to me, and I think to anyone who woke up on Sunday morning to the news and anyone who was there that tragic evening at Club Q, that this is a hate crime, 100%. The folks had been targeted because of who we are. And it's very, very clear that the rhetoric around being gay, around being bisexual, lesbian, transgender, is in the narrative, and it's dehumanizing, right? It's dehumanizing. And that there's elected leaders, there's religious leaders across Colorado and across this country that make it okay to say that a transgender youth, should be bullied or shouldn't be supported, and that any parent or person that is gender conforming, like gender supportive, right? Could possibly go to jail. In Colorado, we have seen multiple pieces of legislation that discriminates, especially against our transgender youth and adults. We just passed a law a couple years back that said you can no longer harm someone and use the gay panic defense, which was on the books and is still on the books in many states, saying that, oh, you found out someone was gay, you panicked and you harmed them. That was a defense that people were able to use in Colorado up until a couple years ago. It's off the books now, but I got to tell you, the feeling that it is okay to harm someone because they're gay or because they're gender nonconforming, that is very real in our state, and it's very real across the country. And it's being spurred upon by these leaders, a lot of political leaders who are saying that this is acceptable speech.
Well, to that point, I just want to go back to something I said at the top, which is 25 laws have passed this year that are anti-LGBTQ. What can you do specifically in your state as a state representative, and what are you working toward to try to prevent this from happening, to try to deal with this increase in hate crimes and rhetoric against the LGBTQ community?
Absolutely. In Colorado, it's very interesting, right? Because we are lucky to have passed many of those laws that many states don't have. We actually started here in Colorado in the 90s as the hate state, a state that said it was okay with Amendment 2, that it was okay to discriminate against LGBTQ people because of who they are in workplace, in public accommodations, in schools. And we've erased that. We've erased that history. We've erased that legacy. We have said that we are supportive of LGBTQ people. We've included it in hate crimes. We affirmed marriage, all of these things that we had hoped would represent progress, And we even support anti-bullying legislation for transgender youth. But still, at the same time, we see an increase in the amount of hate that's targeted at our communities. It is not lost on me that this shooting happened in Colorado Springs, my hometown, but also the hometown of Focus on the Family, a religious organization that targets LGBTQ people. It is not lost on me that just yesterday, right as we were hearing about the shooting, the libs of TikTok, a right-winged account on Twitter, targeted myself and my transgender colleague, Brianna Tatone, simply for supporting LGBTQ youth, a youth group called Dragutant. It is not lost on me that even though we, as Democrats, continue to fight back in the Colorado State Legislature against anti-LGBTQ bills, that rhetoric, that language, the fact that those bills are still being brought every single day has an impact.
Well, we so appreciate your perspective, and I offer my condolences to you as well. I know that this is a day of mourning for you and the entire community, not just in Colorado Springs and Denver, but the LGBTQ community as well. Thank you, and the rest of the country mourning today. Thank you, State Representative Leslie Herod. Really appreciate it. Up next, the future of the Democratic Party and gun reform with the Florida Democrat who just secured Gen Z's first House seat after running a campaign centered on the issue of gun violence. We're going to talk about all of this and what needs to happen next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Gun violence in America has been one of the top issues driving the next generation of Americans into politics, and they're starting to enter and win races for political office. In Orlando, Florida, 25-year-old Representative-elect Maxwell Frost started out as a March for Our Lives organizer in the wake of the 2018 Parkland school shooting. Now, after running a campaign with gun violence as a key issue, he will be the first member of Gen Z seated in Congress. Frost is also set to represent the district where the Pulse nightclub shooting took place in 2016, another act of hate against the LGBTQ community. Representative-elect for Florida's 10th district, Maxwell Frost, joins me now. Congratulations, Representative-elect, and thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Well, obviously, we are speaking on what has become a very tragic day, not only for Colorado Springs, but for this country. And I want to just get your reaction to this. You actually got into politics because of this issue of gun violence. You wanted to do something about it. That's why you have said you are going to Washington. So what is your message today to those not just in Colorado, but all across the country?
Well, so many people woke up yesterday, especially here in Orlando, seeing those headlines, being reminded of what happened in 2016 here in Orlando when armed bigotry, armed hate, armed homophobia claimed the lives of 49 people here at Pulse nightclub. And yesterday, those echoes of those same cries, that same heartbreak came out in our city especially. And so my message to the country is this: we don't have to live this way. We don't have to live in a country where we lose 100 people a day due to gun violence. We don't have to live in a country where our LGBTQ plus brothers, sisters, and siblings have to fear for their lives in one of the only safe places that they have in this country. We don't have to live in a country where the leading cause of death for children is gun violence in 2022 right now. It's a policy failure is what it is. It's the reason I got involved in politics, and we have to come together as a country to solve this problem and build the country where we have the freedom to live free of gun violence.
What do you think, if anything, has changed since the Pulse nightclub? There has obviously been this gun legislation that passed last year, but has anything changed or improved since then, given that here we are again mourning yet another attack against the LGBTQ community?
I think we've had some great wins, especially with the bipartisan gun safety package, especially if we look at state legislatures across the country, many of them that have strengthened their gun laws, but we still have a lot of work to do. And we know that this is an issue. I mean, it's an issue I've been involved in for a decade now, and it feels like it moves slower than molasses, right? Because of groups like the NRA that have a hold on so many politicians. But what we know to be true is this issue, common sense gun reform, is championed by most Americans, including NRA members and Republicans as well. So we really have to come together around this and move forward. I feel really good about the package that was just passed, but we definitely need a lot more. We keep seeing this happen. I mean, just a few months ago, we woke up to the Uvalde shooting that reminded me of the shooting that got me involved, which was Sandy Hook. Same situation, same gun, an elementary school. So we definitely have a lot more work to do.
Before we talk about the work that you plan to do on this issue, just in listening to you speak, it sounds like your generation has, in a way, been shaped by gun violence.
Yeah, I mean, if you take a look at the timeline of Gen Z, I remember growing up, and I call us the mass shooting generation because that's what we've really been through. Columbine, Parkland, Pulse. Then growing up and learning about a young man who was murdered just for being black 30 minutes north of here, Trayvon Martin. George Floyd, that we see from a different kind of violence, Breonna Taylor. So all this kind of trauma and living through it on our cell phones and seeing it online is part of, I think, what's made Generation Z so fed up with not just gun violence, but all the inequities we see. And we're demanding and want to be a part of the solution to build a world that works for everybody where we don't have to have this violence.
One of the things that you have done so far is called on Leader Schumer to bring an assault weapons ban up for a vote. Why start there when, if you look at the votes, it just doesn't seem like that has the support to pass at this point?
Well, yeah, I was honored to join March for Our Lives, families from Uvalde, Newtown Action Alliance, and calling for that vote. And what we know to be true, number one, is that that same bill passed the House of Representatives. And I think it's important to put it up for a vote, even if it doesn't pass, because it gets people on the record and it moves the conversation forward, showing these families and showing the country that this is a priority. And, I know a lot about, waging battles that sometimes don't look like we're going to win, but I think it's important, especially when we talk about the organizing and movement building. I think a big reason why people feel so defeated in this fight specifically is because a lot of times we don't even get the votes. Yeah. A lot of times we don't even have the opportunity to whip those votes, right, and ensure that people have this issue at the top of their mind. So that's why we were calling on Leader Schumer to really bring it up for a vote. I think there's a possibility it can pass, and even if not, we have to show the American people that this is a problem that our government is working on and that we're going to solve.
Let me ask you about two quick things, if I might. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi obviously stepping back from her leadership role. Will you support Hakeem Jeffries as the next leader of Democrats in the House?
Yeah, yes. And, it's really exciting. He'll be the first Black person to lead either party in the history of our Congress. So very exciting. And we see a bunch of other candidates stepping up with a lot of these other positions across our caucus that really show the diversity of our caucus. We have great progressive members as well. So I'm looking forward to this next year and serving with all of our members.
Let me ask you about President Biden. He turned 80 yesterday. Do you feel as though he can adequately represent your generation, Gen Z, to run again in 2024?
I do. And this is something that I've been pleasantly surprised by, right? I mean, in the primary, the president wasn't my first choice, but what he's shown is that he is working for all Americans. He's unafraid to put forth bold transformational policies that are going to change people's lives. And I'll tell you, these years we've seen of record-breaking youth turnout has been people going to vote for President Biden and people going to vote for Democrats under his leadership. So if we want those youth numbers to continue going up, we have to continue to be unafraid to talk about student debt cancellation, talk about the climate crisis, talking about these bold transformational policies that the president has put forth. And so I think we're in a really good course right now. And when you're on a good course, you should stick on that course. And so if the president decides to run 2024, I'll definitely support him. We have a lot of other great candidates as well.
Congressman-elect Maxwell Frost, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. And after the break, with former President Trump battling political and legal headwinds, Republican heavyweights hit the road, eyeing potential presidential runs against him. What it means for the future of the GOP, that's with my panel next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Less than a week after former President Trump announced his presidential candidacy, a who's who of potential Republican rivals descended on Las Vegas this weekend. It was the first GOP cattle call of the 2024 campaign, and these prominent Republicans were not shy about criticizing Mr. Trump or hinting at their own presidential ambitions. Take a look.
Losing and losing and losing. And the fact of the matter is, the reason we're losing is because Donald Trump has put himself before everybody else.
We need real leaders with a record of delivering solutions, the kind of leader that will do the hard work and get the results that we need. We did that when I was governor of South Carolina. We did that when I was UN ambassador. And between us, I'm just getting started.
We have to find people who are putting themselves forward, who have character, commitment, and real competence. Personality and celebrity just aren't going to get it done.
Trump was saying that we'd be winning so much we'd get tired of winning. Well, I'm sick and tired of our party losing.
Well, someone else with White House ambitions is Mr. Trump's former ticket mate, Mike Pence. He spoke to Chuck in a lengthy and expansive interview for yesterday's Meet the Press. Take a listen to part of their exchange about what's next for the former vice president and the Republican Party.
Could you serve in another Trump administration? If the voters, you seem to say, look, if the voters are speaking, you'll respect what the voters say. The Republican voters nominate him in 2024, and he says, Mike, let's do it again. What do you say to him?
I think running for vice president of the United States twice is enough for any American.
Would you join the administration in any capacity if Donald Trump was the nominee?
I think we're going to have better choices.
Oh, that was a big headline there. Joining me now is Eugene Scott, national political reporter for The Washington Post, Stephanie Schriock, Democratic strategist and senior advisor at the Strategic Victory Fund, and Danny Diaz, Republican strategist and former RNC communications director. So, Danny, I have to start with you because former President Trump wanted to announce early because he wanted to clear the field. That was part of his calculation. Doesn't seem like he did that in any capacity.
It appears that there'll be a competitive and robust debate on the Republican side moving into 2024. I think looks like we're going to have a lot of really good candidates, and I think it's going to help kind of lift the floor in the discussion for the issues that matter to the American people.
Eugene, you think about having a big, wide field, and you think about 2016, and that's part of why candidate Trump at the time won the party's nomination, because there were so many candidates in the race.
And you've heard some Republicans so far warn that that could happen again. The majority of Republican voters, if you add all the support up, were against Trump. But there were so many people involved that Trump had the biggest percentage of a minority, candidate, and that could happen again. Just looking at that list of people, not only did it seem like it was going to be as long as 2016, it could be longer because, we're just not even a month out of Trump's announcement, and so we could see more coming in the future.
Stephanie, let me read you something that New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu told Politico. He said, quote, he, Trump, is not going to have the financial support he had anymore. He's not going to have the internal support that he had before. And so, therefore, there's opportunity there. That political weakness is blood in the water for some folks. You obviously are in the fundraising world. What do you make of that? I mean, if he loses those big dollar donors, could that really hurt and weaken him?
I feel like they are all having amnesia to what actually happened in the primary in 2016, as Eugene just explained, which is the more that run, the more divisive it's going to get. And the folks who are anti-Trump are going to get divided a bunch of whole folks. And there is a solid mega base that is not leaving him. And they move small dollar donors. So I don't know how many big dollar donors he needs if he's got a small dollar machine behind him. The others are going to struggle on that front. They're going to be doing the major donor dance. He's going to do less of that because he's got this machine built, and it's not going away.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Danny, we learned over the weekend that Elon Musk is going to let Mr. Trump back on Twitter. Now, he has said for now he's happy with Truth Social. So he's not jumping back on Twitter yet. That doesn't mean that he won't rejoin, though. What does that announcement mean? What's the significance more broadly?
Well, I think he enjoyed the poll that showed that he should get back on Twitter. And obviously he has an interest in Truth Social. I think it remains to be seen whether or not he'll engage on Twitter. But, there are a lot of voices in the public sphere now to a greater degree than were previously. So we'll have to see how all of this plays out, both candidates and voices in this big conversation.
Yeah. Eugene, what is your take? And do you think that Twitter matters? I mean, is it something that gives him a louder microphone?
It does. I mean, we know there are far more Twitter users than Truth Social users. And if he's running for president, he wants to get his message out to as many people as possible. But part of Trump speaking on social media, one could say, is what has gotten him in quite a bit of trouble. And one could argue that him, reopening that Twitter account gives special counsel Jack Smith so much information that maybe wasn't, at the top of his mind before this past weekend.
You look at the polls, and poll after poll shows that Governor DeSantis of Florida is narrowing that gap. He has not announced that he's running for office in 2024, but it certainly seems like he could potentially be a real challenger to former President Trump. Is that what you see in those polls?
Absolutely, and we saw this past weekend at the Republican Jewish Coalition Convention
in Las Vegas.
In Las Vegas. The fact is, DeSantis was there, and he got a standing ovation, lots of support. People were very excited to hear what he had to say, and that makes sense considering his Florida performance.
But you can't discount. You had got to get through a primary before you get to a general, and we just saw a lot of Trump endorsed candidates make it through the primary. Now, they did terrible in the general across the board. However, they win primaries. And why is, again, because the folks in that conference are not the majority of the primary voters in the Republican Party. That is a different group of folks. And I think at the end of the day, we've learned one thing about Donald Trump when he's on the ticket, when he's on the ballot, is he pulls a lot of folks out. And I think we've got to be very aware of this primary electorate could look actually different than it has in the past. I'm really curious to see where this goes.
Look, I think our candidates need to argue about the future. And I think there's a real appetite, if you believe that the Biden agenda is the wrong one, to win the White House. So you're going to need to forecast what you would undertake and what kind of governance you would put in place. And I think, that's going to be the conversation, not just the past, but what we do going forward.
And I think it's an important point you bring up, because former Vice President Mike Pence said to Chuck it was his assessment that candidates who were too focused on 2020 lost, and that was a piece of it. The other thing and factor in some of these losses, as we kind of look back at what happened in these midterms, is abortion and Roe v. Wade. Former President Trump talked about that over the weekend. I want to play a little sound and get your reaction on the other side. Here it is.
We did actually very well, and we took over the House. It would have been nice to do more, but there was a specific reason why it was going to be tough. You know what that reason was. It was a tough issue, and it energized the other side, and people came out on the other side for a specific purpose. And it was unfortunate because in many ways it was such a great achievement, but there was a specific issue that made it more difficult, but it was the right thing.
Stephanie, he seems to be acknowledging that overturning Roe v. Wade is a liability. He put the 3 conservative justices on the court to make it possible.
I was just going to say that, which is, this is he and Mitch McConnell's doing that they have, gotten rid of Roe, which absolutely has energized the American people across the board. And that's not going away. And it's not going to go away. Honestly, I wish it would, because it's really damaging to women and families in this country. But every legislature is going to have a debate about this starting in January, every single year. Like, this issue of abortion is going to be at the forefront in these elections coming up for years to come. And yes, it is a problem. It is interesting. He says it like that. He knows it's a problem of his making, but it's also a problem of the Republicans' making. They've been working on this a long time.
Danny, the counterpoint is former Vice President Mike Pence telling Chuck over the weekend that this is a really important part of the Trump-Pence legacy, that Roe v. Wade was overturned. Is that out of step with the messaging that you think Republicans need to have heading into 2020?
One, look, it was a potent issue. It was demonstrated in the exit polls for sure. I mean, the Republican Party is the pro-life party. I think what you're going to see here is contrast. You're going to see Republicans state their position and highlight that Democratic candidates across the country have no support for limits on abortion, and we're going to let the people decide which side they fall on.
Very quickly, I want to talk about the runoff in Georgia. Eugene, former President Obama, is going to be there campaigning with Senator Warnock. Is he still the most energizing figure within the Democratic Party when it comes to getting out voters? I mean, could he have a real impact in these closing days of the race?
If he's not, he's certainly close to it. I mean, the reality is he's very popular in Georgia with the voters that would back Warnock. And so we're expecting him to deliver what he has done when he's gone out for his candidates repeatedly and throughout midterms and in prior elections. And that's what the Democrats want him to do this time.
All right. Great conversation. Thank you so much. We covered a lot of ground. Really appreciate it. Eugene, Stephanie, and Danny. Appreciate it. And it is that time of year again at the White House, with 3 days to go until Thanksgiving dinner for families all across America. 2 very lucky turkeys will not be on the chopping block this Thursday. The chosen 2 named Chocolate and Chip. You see them there in the South Lawn were pardoned by President Biden today. The festivities marked the 75th anniversary of this White House tradition. And it's also the 75th anniversary of Meet the Press. We're celebrating the longest running show in television history all month long, with clips and highlights from the archives, which you can explore online by scanning the QR code on your screen. And in the spirit of the holidays, here's House Speaker Nancy Pelosi on Meet the Press 20 years ago, comparing herself to all things a Thanksgiving turkey.
You know the story. It's like the Thanksgiving turkey. You bring it out. You get this great honor. You're everybody oohs and ahs that, oh, how wonderful. We have a woman leader in the party and this or that. And then they begin to carve you up like the Thanksgiving turkey. I can take the hit But the fact is I was elected for a reason. The reason is that I bring strong credentials in legislation, strong political credentials to be a political leader as well, and that's what I will do for the House Democrats. I'm very excited to follow in the footsteps of Dick Gephardt, who has been a tremendous leader for our party, and I know his contribution to our country has much more to come yet.
I will always remember that turkey analogy. We thank you for joining us. Nancy Pelosi, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Welcome back. Protests in Iran have continued into their third month, despite reports of brutal crackdowns by the Iranian government. The protests broke out in September following the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini after her arrest by the country's so-called morality police, and have spread rapidly throughout the country, including near the old home of the Islamic Republic's founder, the late Ayatollah Khomeini. Social media videos show flames and protesters near the house-turned-museum. The region's governor told state-run media the building had not burned. At least 378 people have been killed in these protests. That's according to the NGO Iran Human Rights, including 47 children. Thousands more protesters have been arrested, and at least 6 have been sentenced to death. That's according to the Iranian judiciary's news agency. NBC News has not independently confirmed those numbers, though. And today at their World Cup opener, the Iranian national team made headlines when they stayed silent during their national anthem in an apparent act of defiance. The team has previously been criticized for not supporting the protest movement and meeting with the country's president, Ibrahim Raisi. Joining me now is Jasmine Ramsey, Deputy Director for the Center for Human Rights. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Can I just get your take on where things stand right now? This has been over 2 months since Mahsa Amini's death. How significant is it that these protests have shown no sign of stopping?
That's exactly right. Despite lethal force and military units deployed all around the country, people continue to come out into the streets. They're calling for social and political change. They're calling for freedom. They're calling for accountability. It's been more than 2 months since Gina Mahsa Amini was killed in Iranian state custody. And instead of holding a single person accountable, the Iranian government has sent out its state forces on a killing spree. Right now, on the ground in Iran, it's Kurdish populated regions. If you remember, Gina herself was Kurdish. That are facing killing sprees in several cities, including Sanandaj and Juanrud and Piranshah. People are just being gunned down in the streets. We're seeing footage of people running over bodies to try to flee. And it's so important to know that these protesters are not armed. In some cases, they're picking up rocks and throwing them at these gun-wielding state security forces. So it's really not an even fight, yet the Iranian people's courage and resilience is truly astounding.
It truly is. And can you help us to understand what you think the ultimate goal is here? Is it to topple the government?
If you judge by the chants of the people, death to the dictatorship, death to Khamenei, absolutely. They're also saying that they want an end to the killings, and it's really being referred to as a child-killing state. This is a government that trembles at the sight of people that it claims to represent, that goes to all lengths, including gunning down children to preserve its power. So certainly people want the government to come down. More important than that is the fact that the government doesn't want anyone to actually hear them. And right now, as we speak, there's a massive internet shutdown across Iran, and especially in the Kurdish populated regions where there's a massacre being carried out.
Yeah, and there has been a crackdown in various different ways, including the death of a 9-year-old boy just last week. Talk a little bit about that. Is there any sense that that crackdown and that brutality is demoralizing these protesters?
I think it's the opposite. Iranians mourn on the 3rd and 40th day since the killing of someone. And since there's been hundreds of people killed, we're seeing these ceremonies happening over and over. And the Iranian state forces are actually using lethal force at these ceremonies. So people are not even allowed to grieve in peace without facing lethal force. So there's so much anger. And you're seeing this by people, even the family members of those who've been killed, refusing to bend to pressure by government agents to be quiet and speaking with loudspeakers at the funerals for their loved ones, saying the story that the government is peddling in state-controlled media is not true. Here's what happened. They shot at us. They shot at my child. So people are not backing down. I think it's important to focus on the fact that our organization since September, along with a coalition of human rights organizations, has been calling for an emergency session at the UN Human Rights Council. My executive director is in Geneva right now. We're pushing for a resolution that we hope will be passed that will include a fact-finding mission to investigate and gather and compile and analyze evidence of these atrocities and use them later on to hold Iranian officials accountable. This is a process that may take time, but it's important for the people that are conducting these killings by a government that is not representative of the people of Iran to know that the world is watching, that they are assisting a state that is not representing them or the people and will go to every length to silence dissent, and that they will be held accountable. And that's what we're pushing for. We're expecting the resolution to be passed on November 24th.
All right, Jasmine Ramsey, thank you so much, as always, for your insights. And thank you for being with us this hour. I will be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now, but do not go anywhere because officials are set to give an update on that horrific and deadly mass shooting in Colorado Springs minutes from now. My colleague Hallie Jackson picks up that coverage right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.